The smell of reheated casserole and cheap coffee hung in the air, a cloying perfume that refused to be aired out. It was the scent of obligatory grief, and Olivia hated it. From her worn armchair, the one Richard had always claimed was moulded perfectly to his back, she watched them, her children. Ethan, 55, a man whose spine had been replaced by a stock ticker, stood with his wife, Sarah. He wasn't looking at the photos of his father lining the mantelpiece. He was looking at the walls, the ceiling beams, the wide plank floors. He was measuring, calculating. His gaze was an appraisal, cold and efficient. Chloe, 52, was playing her part better. She moved through the clusters of neighbours, her face a carefully constructed mask of sorrow. She would touch an arm, offer a watery smile, and murmur something about how Dad wouldn't have wanted all this fuss. But her eyes, Olivia noted, kept flicking back to Ethan. They communicated in a silent language of shared impatience. They were waiting for the last of the well-wishers to leave, for the performance to end so the real business could begin. A neighbour, Mrs. Gable, a woman whose own husband had passed a decade ago, knelt by Olivia's chair, her hand warm and papery on Olivia's own. He was a good man, Liv, a pillar of this community. Olivia managed a nod. A pillar. Yes, Richard had been a pillar. But pillars cast long shadows, and sometimes they are all that's left holding up a crumbling roof. Thank you, Martha. It's good of you to come. You just call if you need anything. Anything at all. Martha's eyes were sincere, and for a moment, the sincerity was so sharp it felt like a shard of glass in Olivia's chest. It was a stark contrast to the hollow sympathy offered by her own flesh and blood. As Martha moved away, Sarah, her daughter-in-law, drifted over. Sarah was a woman perpetually decorated in beige, as if to avoid leaving an impression on any room she entered. She wrung her hands, a nervous habit that had only worsened with age. It was a beautiful service, Olivia. Just beautiful. It was a service, Olivia said, her voice flat. Sarah flinched at the lack of warmth. Ethan is just... He's worried about you. We all are. This big place. She gestured vaguely at the sprawling farmhouse, at the 55 years of memories soaked into its timber frame. It's a lot for one person. I've been one person in this house for a long time, Sarah. Richard was here, but he wasn't present. Not for years. The admission slipped out. A truth so old it had lost its power to wound her. But it was still sharp enough to make Sarah recoil. Before Sarah could formulate a response, Chloe swooped in, her arms sliding around Olivia's shoulders. The scent of her expensive perfume was an assault. Mama, don't you worry about a thing. We're going to take care of everything. Her voice was a syrupy whisper, meant to sound comforting, but it landed like a threat. She squeezed Olivia's shoulder. You've done enough. It's time for you to rest. Rest. They used that word like a death sentence. They saw her 80 years not as a repository of wisdom and resilience, but as a liability, a problem to be managed. Ethan finally approached, his phone held loosely in his hand, as if he'd just finished a call. He'd loosened his tie, the only concession he'd made to the occasion. Mum, he began, his tone attempting a gentleness that didn't fit him. We need to be practical. There it was. The word that sanitized greed and turned it into a virtue. Practicality. The market in Willow Creek is peaking, he continued, his voice dropping as if sharing a state secret. Developers are sniffing around the valley. The asset, the farm, its value has never been higher. The asset, not home, not the place you built with my father. The asset. Olivia felt a coldness spread through her limbs that had nothing to do with the draft from the old window panes. Her grief was an inconvenience. Her presence was a complication in their financial strategy. This isn't the time, Ethan, Olivia said, her voice low and steady. It's the perfect time, Chloe countered, her mask of sympathy slipping to reveal the hard ambition beneath. We have to think about your future. Your security. We can't have you rattling around in this huge place, worrying about the roof and the taxes and the upkeep. It's too much for you now. Your father and I managed, Olivia said, the words tasting like ash. Dad's gone, Mum, Ethan said, the statement blunt, brutal. He glanced around the room, which was now blessedly empty except for the four of them. The last of the mourners had finally trickled out, leaving behind a silence thick with unspoken intentions. And he wasn't exactly a businessman. He let things go. He was sentimental. We have to be realistic. He was calling his father a fool on the day of his funeral. The audacity of it stole Olivia's breath. Richard had been many things difficult, distant, secretive, but he had loved this land. Or, at least, he had loved possessing it. "What are you suggesting?" Olivia asked, though she already knew. The dread was a physical thing now, a knot tightening in her stomach. "We found a wonderful place for you," Chloe chimed in, her voice bright and false. "A community, with people your own age, activities, healthcare on site. It's beautiful. All your meals prepared. No more worries. A home," Olivia said, the word a curse. "A retirement village," Ethan corrected, as if the terminology made it less of a prison. "Top of the line. And selling the farm will set you up for life. More than set you up. You'll have a trust, an allowance. You won't have to think about money ever again." They were talking about her life, as if it were already over. A set of logistical problems to be solved and filed away. They saw an old woman, frail and grieving. An easy mark. They had no idea that grief had scoured her clean, leaving behind a hard, clear-eyed focus. She saw them for exactly what they were. Vultures, circling what they believed to be a corpse. "I'm not leaving my home," she said. The finality in her voice surprised even herself. A flicker of annoyance crossed Ethan's face. He exchanged a look with Chloe. The gentle approach had failed. Time for phase 2. He pulled a sleek, dark grey tablet from his leather briefcase. "Mum, look. I know this is hard, but Dad's estate, it's complicated. There are a few final papers that need to be dealt with to close things out. Just formalities. It's all digital now. Saves a lot of hassle with lawyers and notaries." He knelt beside her, the same way Mrs. Gable had, but there was no warmth in his posture. It was the pose of a predator, cornering its prey. He held out the tablet. The screen glowed with a document full of dense, unreadable text. "It's just standard procedure," he said smoothly. "It gives me the authority to act on your behalf, to settle Dad's final accounts, and wrap up the estate. It simplifies everything." "I want to read it," Olivia said, reaching for the device. Ethan pulled it back slightly. "Mum, it's just legal jargon. It would take you all night. Honestly. Chloe and I have been over it with the lawyer. It's just consent to finalize." He smiled, a thin, tight-lipped expression that didn't reach his eyes. "It's about making things easier for you." Chloe placed a hand on her arm. "Please, Mama, don't make this harder than it has to be. We're just trying to help." They were flanking her, a coordinated attack of false concern and corporate jargon. Olivia felt a wave of profound weariness wash over her. She had just buried her husband of 55 years. She had endured the hollow condolences of a town. Now she had to fight her own children. For a fleeting moment, the idea of giving in, of simply letting the tide pull her under, was a powerful temptation. The retirement home, the prepared meals, the absence of worry. It was a seductive illusion of peace. But then she looked past them, through the window, to the old oak tree on the hill. The one Richard had planted the day Ethan was born. The one she had sat under with Chloe, teaching her the names of the constellations. This land wasn't an asset. It was her life's work. It was the silent witness to every joy and every sorrow she had ever known. And they would not take it from her. But she was tired. So deeply, bone-achingly tired. Maybe just this one thing. Sign the paper. Get them to leave. She could rest, and then she would find the strength to fight them tomorrow. "Where do I sign?" she asked, her voice a whisper. Relief flooded Ethan's face. It was so naked, so triumphant, that it made her stomach clench. He had won. He tapped the screen. A small box appeared at the bottom of the page. Right here. You just use your finger. It's a biometric signature. Perfectly legal. He held the tablet steady. Olivia looked at the glowing screen. At the wall of text she couldn't comprehend. She saw her son's expectant face, her daughter's relieved smile. She saw the ghost of her husband, a man who had taught his children the value of everything and the worth of nothing. With a hand that trembled slightly, she traced her name in the box. Olivia. The moment her finger lifted, Ethan swiped the screen, and the tablet went dark. He snatched it back, with a speed that was almost violent. There, all done, he said, his voice brisk, all pretense of gentleness gone. He stood up, slipping the tablet back into his briefcase and snapping the locks shut. The sound echoed in the quiet room like a cell door slamming. We'll be in touch in a few days, Mom, to discuss the next steps. Chloe bent down and kissed Olivia's cheek. It was a dry, dismissive peck. Get some rest, Mama. You deserve it. They left. The front door closed behind them, and the silence they left in their wake was heavier, more menacing than the noise of the funeral had ever been. Olivia sat in Richard's chair, the imprint of his body a cold hollow around her. She looked at her hand, the one that had signed her life away. She hadn't made things easier. She had just armed her enemies. The cold dread wasn't a premonition anymore. It was a certainty. And it was just beginning. The week that followed was a study in silence. The casseroles were thrown out. The sympathy cards were stacked, unread, on a side table. The house settled back into its own rhythm of groans and sighs, the language of old timber and shifting foundations. Olivia moved through the rooms like a ghost, the silence amplifying every sound, the tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, the drip of a faucet she'd meant to fix, the lonely howl of the wind whipping across the open fields. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was waiting. It was the deep breath before the plunge. She found herself talking to Richard, or at least to the space he used to occupy. You fool, she'd murmur, standing at the foot of their unmade bed. You absolute fool. You raised them to be sharks, and you left me in the water. There was no anger in it, just a flat statement of fact. He had built an empire of land and secrets, and in the end, it was devouring them all. On the seventh day, the silence was broken. It wasn't the familiar rumble of a neighbour's pickup truck or the mail carrier's jeep. It was a low electric hum, a sound so alien to the rutted dirt drive that it made the hairs on Olivia's arms stand up. She went to the window. A sleek, black SUV, the kind that looked more suited to a corporate headquarters than a Montana farm, was gliding to a stop in front of the house. The windows were tinted, anonymous, menacing. The driver's side door opened, and Ethan emerged. He wore a crisp, dark suit, no longer playing the part of a grieving son. He looked like what he was, a businessman closing a deal. From the passenger side, Chloe stepped out. She was also in severe, professional attire, her face set in a determined, unsmiling line. They didn't look like they were coming for a visit. They looked like they were here for a transaction. Olivia met them at the door before they could knock. She stood on the threshold, her small frame a flimsy barrier against the storm she knew was coming. Mom, Ethan said, his voice devoid of any warmth. He didn't try to hug her. He didn't even make eye contact for more than a second. We need to talk. You're on my property, Ethan, she said, her voice quiet but firm. You can talk from the porch, a flash of irritation in his eyes. He wasn't used to being denied. This won't take long, he said, stepping onto the porch but not attempting to enter. Chloe stood behind him, a silent, grim-faced soldier. The farm is sold, Mom, Ethan said, delivering the line like a surgeon, making a clean, deep incision. There was no preamble, no apology. Just the cold, hard fact. Olivia's mind raced back to the tablet, to the glowing screen and the wall of unread words. The blood drained from her face. Sold? You can't. I didn't agree to sell. Yes, you did. Ethan said. The papers you signed last week. They weren't just to settle Dad's estate. One was a durable power of attorney, granting me the authority to manage your affairs. The other was the sales agreement for the property. The words hung in the air, monstrous and unbelievable. Power of attorney. Sales agreement. He'd used her grief, her exhaustion, her trust, as a weapon against her. You tricked me, she whispered. The horror of the betrayal suffocating her. We helped you, Chloe corrected, her voice sharp, defensive. You're not well, Mama. You haven't been for years. You're confused. You're not capable of making these kinds of decisions anymore. I am not confused. Olivia's voice cracked, a flare of rage cutting through the shock. I know exactly what you are. You're thieves. You are stealing my home. We are securing your future, Ethan said, his voice rising, his composure finally breaking. This place is a millstone around your neck, and frankly, we have a legal opinion stating you are not mentally fit to manage an asset of this magnitude. It's done. It was the phrase legal opinion that chilled her to the bone. This wasn't a spontaneous act of greed. It was a premeditated, carefully orchestrated campaign. They had been planning this. For how long? Months? Years? Had they been waiting for Richard to die, like buzzards on a wire? Where? Olivia asked, the fight draining out of her, replaced by a terrifying, hollow dread. Where am I supposed to go? Chloe's expression softened into something that was meant to look like pity, but it was the pity of a zookeeper for a caged animal. We found a wonderful facility for you. It's called Meadowbrook Gardens. It's in Oregon. Hundreds of miles away. Far from anyone she knew. Far from Martha Gable and her warm, sincere hands. Far from the land that held the echoes of her life. An anonymous room in an anonymous building in an anonymous state. A place to be stored until she died. We've even packed a bag for you, Chloe added, gesturing to the back of the SUV, where Olivia could now see one of her own suitcases. The sight of it, so mundane and yet so sinister, made her feel physically ill. They had been in her house, in her room, touching her things, deciding for her which small pieces of her life she would be allowed to keep. The full scope of their cruelty was breathtaking. They hadn't just taken her home, they had erased her autonomy, her identity, her very personhood. They had declared her irrelevant. You can't do this, she said, the words a desperate plea. This is my home. I have lived here for 55 years. Ethan's face hardened into a mask of cold finality. He took a step closer, his presence looming over her. It's done, Mum, he said, his voice low and unforgiving. The new owner is a corporation. They're not sentimental. They want possession of the property in 48 hours. 48 hours. The two words were a death sentence. 48 hours to vacate a lifetime. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a crisp, white envelope. He didn't hand it to her. He placed it on the small table next to the door. This has all the information. The address for Meadowbrook, the contact numbers. A check for your first 3 months. He looked at her then, truly looked at her, and there was nothing in his eyes. No love, no remorse, just the flat, empty gaze of a man who had successfully liquidated an asset. It's for your own good, he said, the words a final, meaningless insult. He turned and walked back to the SUV without another word. Chloe lingered for a moment, her face a mess of conflicting emotions, guilt, justification, a flicker of something that might have been regret. Mama, she started, but the word died on her lips. What was there to say? She gave a helpless little shrug, a gesture of pathetic inadequacy, and then she turned and followed her brother. The sleek black vehicle started with its alien hum, executed a flawless 3-point turn on the gravel, and glided away down the long dirt road, leaving a cloud of dust to settle in its wake. Olivia stood frozen on the porch, the white envelope on the table looking like a tombstone. 48 hours. The clock had started ticking. She was 80 years old, and she was being evicted from her own life. The first 24 hours were a blur of frantic, useless motion. Olivia's hands, gnarled with arthritis but still capable, flew across the buttons of her old landline phone. The first call was to a lawyer in Bozeman, a name she'd found online. His voice was young, slick, and deeply unhelpful. "A digital power of attorney, Mrs. Vance," he'd said, a note of professional weariness in his tone. "Especially one with a biometric signature. That's tough. Very tough to challenge. The courts see those as ironclad. You'd have to prove you were coerced or mentally incapacitated at the moment of signing. And your son has a legal opinion stating you are? Oof, that's an uphill battle. A very, very steep one. But he lied to me," Olivia insisted, her voice thin with desperation. "He told me it was something else. He'll say you were confused. It becomes a he said, she said situation, and he has the documentation. Fighting this, honestly, it would take years. It would cost you every penny you have, and the chances of winning are slim to none. I'm sorry." He wasn't sorry. He was just moving on to his next billable hour. The second call was to the local sheriff's office. The deputy who answered was polite but firm. "Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but this sounds like a civil matter, not a criminal one. If they have a sales agreement and a power of attorney, legally, they have the right. We can't intervene in a property dispute without a court order, a civil matter." The polite, bureaucratic term for the complete demolition of her world. Defeated, she hung up the phone. Every door she tried was locked and bolted. The system, with its digital signatures and ironclad documents, was designed by men like Ethan. It was efficient, cold, and had no room for things like truth or justice. It only cared about what was on the paper, or in this case, the tablet. The hours bled into one another. The sun arced across the sky, casting long shadows from the barn. Olivia didn't pack. She couldn't bring herself to touch the suitcase her children had so thoughtfully prepared. To pack would be to surrender. Instead, she walked. She walked the perimeter of the property, her hand brushing against the weathered wood of the fence posts Richard had sunk into the earth half a century ago. She walked through the dusty, silent barn, the smell of old hay and leather filling her lungs. She stood on the hill and looked down at the house, a sturdy, defiant island in a sea of rolling green. This was more than a house. It was the only thing in her life that had ever truly felt like hers. Richard had been a presence, a partner, but he had been a man of secrets. His heart a locked room she was never allowed to enter. Her children, once a part of her, had become strangers, their love curdling into a toxic mix of duty and resentment. But the land was honest. It demanded work, and in return, it gave life. It held the echoes of her laughter, the stain of her tears, the sweat of her labor. It was her witness. As dusk began to settle on the final day, painting the sky in strokes of orange and bruised purple, Olivia sank onto the top step of her porch. She was done fighting. The calls were made. The doors were closed. There was nothing left to do but wait. Wait for the car to come and take her to her storage unit. Wait for the end. She wrapped her thin cardigan tighter around her shoulders, the evening air carrying a sudden chill. A profound sense of peace, the kind that comes only after the last vestiges of hope have been extinguished, settled over her. She would not cry. She would not give them the satisfaction. She would sit on this porch and watch the last sunset over her home. And she would burn the image into her memory. It would be the last thing she owned. That's when she heard it. Or rather, felt it. A low vibration through the wooden steps. She looked up. Headlights were cutting through the deepening twilight at the far end of the long dirt drive. But it wasn't the corporate SUV. This was different. The lights were sharp, white LEDs, and they were attached to a vehicle that moved with an eerie, predatory silence. It made no sound, no rumble of an engine, just the soft crunch of tires on gravel. as it glided toward the house. It was a luxury electric vehicle, long and low and black as a starless night. It looked like something from another planet, an alien craft, set down in the rustic heart of Montana. It pulled to a stop where Ethan's SUV had been just a day before. The driver's side door swung open with a silent, upward motion. A figure emerged, a man. He was tall but stooped slightly by age, probably in his late 70s. But where Olivia's years had softened her, his seemed to have sharpened him, honing him down to bone and will. He was impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored coat that probably cost more than her truck. His silver hair was perfectly cut. Even from a distance, Olivia could see the hard set of his jaw, the unyielding line of his mouth. He didn't look at her. He stood beside his futuristic car and stared at the house. He looked at it for a long, silent moment, and his expression was a terrifying cocktail of emotions. There was hatred in it, raw and ancient. There was a possessiveness that was far more potent than Ethan's greedy appraisal. And there was something else, a deep, bottomless well of pain. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he turned his head and his eyes found her, sitting small and frail on the porch steps. They were pale, piercing eyes, the color of a winter sky. They looked right through her, as if he were seeing not just the old woman on the porch, but every version of her that had ever existed. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a dry, rasping sound, like stones grinding together. A voice unused to conversation, rusted from decades of silence. Olivia. He said her name, not as a question but as a judgment. Olivia froze. Her heart, which she thought had been shattered into dust, gave a painful, violent lurch. The world tilted on its axis. The air thinned. It was a face she had last seen in a faded black and white photograph. A face she had last seen in the flesh when he was just a boy of 16, full of fury and rebellion, turning his back on this very farm and everyone in it. A face she had mourned. A face she had been told was buried in an unmarked grave somewhere in a forgotten war. It was impossible. It was a phantom conjured by grief and despair. But the man standing by the silent car was terrifyingly real. It was her brother. It was Arthur. The sound of the luxury sedan's engine died, leaving a silence that felt heavier than the one before it. Olivia stood on the porch, a fragile statue in the face of the storm, and watched the man get out. He was older, of course. 60 years was a chasm, but the way he held his shoulders, the set of his jaw, it was unmistakable. It was a ghost walking out of the past, wearing a suit that cost more than her truck. Arthur? The name was a cracked whisper, lost in the Montana air. He closed the car door with a solid, definitive thud. He didn't smile. His eyes, the same sharp blue she remembered from their childhood, weren't looking at her with affection. They were scanning the property, the barn, the fields, the sagging fence line. He was an appraiser, not a brother. "Hello, Olivia." His voice was different, smoother, colder, stripped of the boyish drawl she remembered. It was the voice of boardrooms and hostile takeovers. "Arthur, I thought you were dead." Her voice trembled. A part of her, a foolish, desperate part, ignited with a flicker of hope. He was here. Family was here. He would stop this. He would save her. He finally looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her faded dress, her worn face, and the desperation clinging to her like dust. There was no pity in his eyes, only a cool, distant assessment. Convenient story, I'm sure, for everyone. He walked towards the porch, his expensive leather shoes crunching on the gravel drive. Each step was a hammer blow against her fragile hope. He didn't move to embrace her. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, forcing her to look down at him. A subtle, yet clear, establishment of power. "What are you doing here, Arthur, after all this time?" "I'm here on business," he said, his tone flat. "My business. This farm." A cold dread, far worse than the fear Ethan had inspired, began to creep up her spine. "What do you mean? What about the farm? I bought it," he said, as casually as if he were announcing he'd bought a newspaper. The sale was posted on a private real estate network. An anonymous buyer. A quick cash closing. Your son was very eager to unload it. The world tilted. The porch boards seemed to sway beneath her feet. You're the buyer? You bought the farm?" "I did." The flicker of hope died, plunging her into a darkness colder than any she had ever known. He hadn't come to save her. He was the final nail in her coffin. "But why?" "To help me." A dry, mirthless chuckle escaped his lips. It was a terrible sound. "Help you? Olivia, you've lived here for 55 years. You drank the wine from the poisoned well and never once asked where it came from. Why would I help you?" His words were like slaps. "I don't understand." "Of course you don't. You never did. You were always happy in the little world Richard built for you, weren't you?" He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a low, venomous growl. "I'm not here to save you, sister. I'm here to reclaim my stolen birthright." "Birthright?" "This was Richard's land. My home." "Was it?" he sneered. "This land was never Richard's. It was never our father's. Our entire life, your entire marriage, has been built on a foundation of fraud." He began to pace in front of the porch, a caged predator finally released. "You think Dad was some hard-working pioneer who built this place from nothing? He was a thief, a common cheat. This land," he said, gesturing to the sprawling fields with a contemptuous wave of his hand, "belonged to his brother, our uncle, Uncle Thomas." The name was a ghost from a story she'd barely been told, a man who had gone out west and was never heard from again. "Dad found out Thomas was sitting on a gold mine here," Arthur continued, his voice laced with the bitterness of a 60-year-old wound. "But Thomas wouldn't sell. So Dad, our sainted father, forged a deed. A simple, elegant piece of fraud. He paid off a clerk in the county office, filed the paperwork, and legally erased his own brother from the map. Thomas came back one day to find his land sold out from under him, his name a ghost in the records. He had nothing. He died a broken, penniless man in a city he didn't know. And I was the one who found that out. I was 17. When I confronted Father, he didn't deny it. He told me that was how the world worked. So I left. I let you all think I was dead. Because, to me, you were." Olivia sank onto the top step, the strength gone from her legs. The story was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. The pride she'd held, the legacy she thought Richard had nurtured, it was all a lie, a dirty, rotten secret. I never knew," she whispered, her hands covering her face. "No," Arthur said, his voice devoid of sympathy. "You didn't know because you didn't want to know. It was easier to believe the fairy tale." He stopped pacing and looked down at her, his shadow falling over her. "I've spent my life building an empire large enough to buy this rotten piece of land 10 times over, without even noticing. And I waited. I watched from afar. When I saw the listing go up, I knew my time had come." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. It wasn't a legal paper. It was a printed rental agreement. He dropped it onto her lap. "What is this?" "That is your new reality," he said coldly. "You can stay. For now, you can live in this house of lies. But you are no longer the matriarch of Willow Creek. You are my tenant. You will pay rent, which I will deduct from a small allowance I'll provide. You will not make any changes. You will not have visitors without my express permission. You will live here, surrounded by the truth of what this family is, until I decide what to do with this corrupted ground." She stared at the paper, the black ink blurring through her tears. He hadn't come to evict her. He had come to imprison her. In her own home, in her own memories. It was a punishment far more cruel, far more complete than anything Ethan and Chloe could have devised. He was leaving her with nothing but the truth, and the truth was a slow, corrosive poison. The days that followed were a silent torment. Arthur moved into the master bedroom, the one she had shared with Richard for over 5 decades, without so much as a word. He worked from a sleek silver laptop at the dining room table, his voice a low, constant murmur of multi-million-dollar deals and corporate jargon that felt alien in the rustic home. He was a phantom from another world, a ghost of vengeance haunting her every waking moment. The house, once a sanctuary of memories, was now a museum of lies. Every photograph on the wall felt like a mockery. Every piece of furniture seemed to whisper the secret she now knew. She was the ghost, drifting through rooms that were no longer hers, her presence tolerated but not acknowledged. She found herself retreating, physically and mentally. She spent hours in her small sewing room, staring out the window at the land she no longer owned. The oppression was suffocating. It was during one long grey afternoon, with the sound of Arthur's curt voice on a conference call echoing from the other room, that an old memory surfaced. Richard, standing at the top of the storm cellar steps. "Never go down there, Olivia," he'd said, his voice unusually firm. "It's full of black mold. The steps are rotten. It's not safe for you." But it wasn't his words she remembered so clearly. It was his eyes. There was no concern in them. There was a command, a lock. It was the only place on the entire farm he had ever explicitly forbidden her from entering. At the time, she had accepted it, as she had accepted so many things. He was her husband. He knew best. Now, his prohibition felt different. It felt like a vault door, with Arthur engrossed in his work. A reckless impulse took hold. She had nothing left to lose. Her home was a prison. Her family had betrayed her, and her entire life was a fraud. What was one more broken rule? She pulled an old flashlight from a kitchen drawer and walked to the heavy wooden door in the pantry that led to the cellar. The air that seeped from the cracks was cool and smelled of damp earth and forgotten things. The handle was stiff. She had to put her whole body into it, her shoulder groaning in protest, before it finally scraped open. The wooden steps were indeed old, but they were solid oak, not rotten. They creaked under her weight as she descended into the cool darkness, the flashlight beam cutting a shaky path ahead. The cellar was small, with stone walls and a hard-packed dirt floor. It was mostly empty, save for a few dusty jars of preserves from a decade ago and some old gardening tools. It didn't look dangerous. It just looked neglected. She ran the beam of light along the stone walls. They were rough-hewn, fitted together a century ago. But on the far wall, behind a stack of rotted wooden crates, one stone seemed different. It was smoother than the others, and the mortar around it was a slightly different color, almost imperceptible in the dim light. Curiosity piqued. She pushed the crates aside. They crumbled under her touch. She pressed her fingers against the stone. It didn't budge. She pushed harder, digging her worn nails into the seam. It shifted, just a fraction of an inch, but it moved. Her heart began to beat faster. Using the edge of a rusty trowel, she pried at the mortar. It flaked away easily. After a few minutes of frantic work, the stone was loose enough to pull free. It was heavy, and she grunted as she set it on the floor. Behind it was a dark, square cavity, and inside that cavity sat a grey metal box. It wasn't a sentimental keepsake box. It was military grade, with a heavy-duty latch. It felt cold and impersonal. With trembling hands, she lifted it out. It was heavier than she expected. She carried it back upstairs, her mind racing. What could Richard have hidden with such care? Love letters from a past affair, the original, forged deed Arthur had spoken of. She sat at the kitchen table, the box before her like a Pandora's curse. She flicked the latch. It opened with a dull click. The lid lifted to reveal not letters, not documents, but several thick, leather-bound accounting ledgers. They were old, the kind with green and white columns and crisp, numbered pages. Disappointment warred with confusion. Why hide accounting books? She lifted the topmost one. The cover was simply embossed. 1985. 1995. She opened it. The pages were filled with Richard's handwriting as precise, controlled, and emotionless as the man himself. But the entries made no sense. They weren't debits and credits for farm equipment or cattle feed. They were a bizarre code: WFZV 10K, JM permit 5K, bank loan CB forgiveness favor. It was gibberish. She flipped through the pages, through years and years of the same cryptic notes. She was about to close the book, to dismiss it as some strange personal habit, when a name caught her eye. CB. Charles Beckman. He'd been the town's sheriff back in the 90s, a man known for his harsh demeanor and a sudden, unexplained early retirement. Beside his initials was a note, "Do I charge, son?" File disappeared. Ongoing gratitude. A chill snaked down her spine. She picked up another ledger. This one dated 2005. She frantically scanned the pages. There it was again. WF. William Fairfax, the current president of Willow Creek Savings and Loan. The same man who had approved Ethan's business loan without blinking. The same man who held the mortgage on Chloe's boutique. Next to his initials was a series of entries. One stood out. Origin Sin. Annual retainer. 25K. Origins in. The words echoed Arthur's story. The forged deed. Richard knew. He'd always known. And he hadn't just lived with the lie. He had monetized it. She spent the rest of the day and into the night poring over the ledgers. The flashlight grew dim, so she replaced the batteries. The silence of the house was broken only by the frantic rustle of pages and her own sharp inhales of breath. A horrifying, monstrous pattern began to emerge. The ledgers were not accounting books. They were a meticulously detailed record of blackmail. 40 years of it. Richard had used the farm's fraudulent origins, the origin sin, as his primary lever against the old families who knew the truth and had profited from it. But it didn't stop there. He had been a collector of secrets. Every hushed-up affair, every gambling debt, every bent rule and backroom deal in Willow Creek Richard had known, and he had recorded it in his coded script. He had used these secrets to extort money, to demand favors, to weave a web of power and influence that had this entire town in its grip. The zoning variance for a developer friend, the suppressed health code violations at a popular restaurant, the scholarship for a councilman's underachieving son. It was all there. A map of the town's rotten soul. She felt sick. The man she had loved, the man she had built a life with, was a stranger. Worse than a stranger. He was a monster who wore a mask of quiet dignity. Her husband hadn't been a farmer. He had been a spider, sitting at the center of a vast invisible web, and she had been living in it, blind and content, for 55 years. Arthur thought the family's sin was a single act of theft decades ago. He was wrong. The original sin was just the seed. Richard had cultivated it into a forest of corruption. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a pale, grey light into the kitchen. Olivia sat amidst the open ledgers, her body aching, her mind numb. The shock was slowly hardening into something else, a cold, clear anger. She was not just a victim of her children's greed or her brother's vengeance. She had been the longest-held captive of Richard's secret empire, and in her hands, on her kitchen table, lay the keys to his kingdom. The proof, the weapon, the hope. A week bled into the next. The farmhouse remained a cold battlefield of silence between Olivia and Arthur. He continued his relentless work, a spectre of modern wealth haunting the rustic halls. Olivia, meanwhile, lived a double life. By day, she was the quiet, defeated tenant. By night, she was a cryptographer, hunched over the kitchen table, the devil's ledgers spread before her. The code was Richard's mind, on paper, logical, compartmentalized, and utterly ruthless. She started a notebook of her own, slowly translating his symbols. WF was William Fairfax. CB was Sheriff Beckman. ZV was zoning variance. Each decoded entry was a small victory, another piece of the ugly mosaic falling into place. The oppressive quiet was shattered one morning by the sound of a different vehicle coming up the drive. Not the whisper of Arthur's German sedan, but the familiar rattle of an aging Honda. Olivia's heart leaped. Through the window, she saw her granddaughter Mia getting out of the car. Mia slammed the car door with a satisfying thud of youthful indignation. At 25, she was a whirlwind of energy and fierce empathy, with a law student's sharp, analytical eyes. She stormed up the porch steps, her face a mask of fury. "Grandma," she cried, pulling Olivia into a hug that felt like the first genuine human contact she'd had in weeks. "I am so, so sorry. I just found out. I was buried in exams. And Mom, she just mentioned it in passing, like they'd moved you to a nicer place. I called Dad, and he gave me the whole disgusting story. I can't believe them. I cannot believe their greed." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes, not of sorrow this time, but of relief. Here was an ally. Here was family that hadn't been poisoned. Arthur appeared in the doorway of the dining room, drawn by the noise. He looked at Mia with the same cold indifference he showed everyone. "You're trespassing," he said, his voice flat. "Olivia is not permitted guests." Mia turned on him, her anger flaring. "And who the hell are you?" "I'm her brother," Olivia said quickly, stepping between them. "Arthur, this is my granddaughter Mia. She's not a guest. She's family." Arthur's eyes narrowed, but he gave a curt, dismissive nod and retreated back into the shadows of his workspace. The message was clear. He was tolerating this. For now. Once he was gone, Mia's voice dropped to an urgent whisper. "Grandma, what is going on? A long-lost great-uncle suddenly owns the farm. And he's treating you like a prisoner." Olivia led her to the kitchen, the one room that felt like her own clandestine headquarters. She sat Mia down at the table and made a decision. She couldn't do this alone. She needed this bright, fiery young woman. She needed her hope. "It's worse than you think, Mia. Much worse." Slowly, deliberately, Olivia explained everything. Arthur's story about the forged deed, the truth about her sainted great-grandfather, and then she slid one of the ledgers across the table. Mia looked at it, confused. "Grandpa Richard's accounting book?" "Look closer," Olivia urged. Mia leaned in, her sharp eyes scanning the coded entries. She frowned, her legal mind immediately recognizing the unnatural syntax. "WF, ZV, 10K. This isn't accounting. This is a log." "It's a record of blackmail," Olivia said, her voice steady. "Spanning 40 years. Grandpa Richard built an empire of secrets, and this whole town was his piggy bank." Mia's jaw dropped as Olivia explained her slow process of deciphering the code, pointing out the names of prominent citizens, the bank president, the former sheriff, the council members. Mia listened, her initial fury at her parents expanding into a horrified awe at the scale of the deception. "My God, Grandma," she breathed, looking from the ledgers to Olivia's face. "You've been living on top of a volcano." She shook her head, a new, steely resolve hardening her expression. Okay, this is huge. But it's also our leverage." Her entire demeanor shifted. The angry granddaughter was replaced by the law student, the future attorney. She was no longer just here to offer comfort. She was here to build a case. "They used a digital power of attorney, right?" Dad said it was something called Sign Secure Cloud, Mia said, already pulling her laptop from her bag. "He thinks because it's digital, it's ironclad. He's an arrogant fool. Digital leaves a trail, a bigger one than paper ever could." For the next hour, the kitchen transformed into a war room. The old world and the new world collided. On one side of the table, Olivia worked with her pen and paper, deciphering the analog sins of the past. On the other, Mia's fingers flew across her keyboard, hunting for digital ghosts. "The service dad used logs everything," Mia explained, her eyes glued to the screen. IP addresses, device IDs, timestamps, GPS coordinates. He had you sign it on a tablet. Right here, at this table. Olivia nodded. Yes. He said it was just a formality for the inheritance. Okay, Mia murmured, typing furiously. So the signature event should be logged with a timestamp and a GPS coordinate pin right here in Willow Creek. But the power of attorney itself, the legal document, had to be created and uploaded to the service first. Dad did that from his office in the city. I'm willing to bet my entire tuition that he was careless. If I can get into the service's back-end log sand, there are ways, legal discovery requests, or even finding a security flaw, I might be able to prove that the document was created or modified after you signed the blank authorization, or that the timestamp of the signature was manipulated. It's called forensic metadata analysis. It's how they catch corporate crooks all the time. They think they're so smart, but they get sloppy. Olivia watched her, a sense of wonder mixing with her grim determination. She was deciphering Richard's secrets, a language of the past. Mia was speaking a new language, one of metadata and IP addresses, to unravel Ethans. They were two generations, fighting the same war with different weapons. Here's one, Olivia said, pointing to an entry in the 2015 ledger. Ethan, startup capital, 50K, leverage applied RL. Mia stopped typing and looked at the entry. RL? What's that? Olivia's face was grim. Richard's ledgers. This book, Mia. This isn't the first time Ethan has seen these. This entry suggests he found them 10 years ago, and he didn't expose his father. He used them. He blackmailed his own father for the money to start his business. The air went out of the room. Mia stared at the entry, the colour draining from her face. Her father wasn't just greedy. He wasn't just a cheat. He had learnt the family business from the master himself. He's not just a liar, Mia whispered, a new, colder anger in her voice. He's one of them. She looked up from her laptop, her eyes meeting her grandmother's. The last bit of girlish softness was gone, replaced by the hardened glare of an adversary. Okay, this changes things. This isn't about getting the farm back anymore, is it? No, dear, Olivia said, placing her hand over Mia's. It's about burning down the forest. The alliance was sealed. A whisper of hope had become a plan for a counterattack. While Olivia continued her work on the ledgers, mapping out 40 years of corruption, Mia became her secret agent in the digital realm, digging, probing, searching for the single, fatal crack in the foundation of Ethan's high-tech betrayal. The ghost in the house now had a ghost in the machine fighting on her side. A few days later, Olivia knew she had enough. She had translated nearly half of the most critical entries, creating a damning portfolio of Richard's reign. The names, the dates, the sins all laid bare in her own neat script. It was time. She couldn't dismantle this network alone. She needed power. She needed a battering ram. She needed Arthur. She found him in Richard's old study, the one room she had avoided more than any other. He had turned it into his own command center. Charts and financial reports were spread across the mahogany desk where Richard had once signed checks for cattle feed. He was on the phone, his voice a blade. No, the offer is final. Liquidate their assets. All of them. I don't care about their fourth quarter projections. I care about their debt-to-equity ratio, and it's a disaster. Buy the debt. All of it. Then we squeeze. Call me back when it's done. He hung up without a goodbye and looked up, his eyes cold and impatient. What is it, Olivia? She didn't flinch. The fear she'd felt for him, for everyone, had been burned away, replaced by a cold, hard purpose. She walked to the desk and placed the thickest of Richard's ledgers on top of his financial reports. The heavy book landed with a solid, definitive thud that echoed in the quiet room. You're wrong, she said, her voice clear and strong. Arthur raised an eyebrow. Am I? About what? About everything. You think the sin of this family was a single act of forgery 60 years ago. You think you're here to avenge a stolen birthright from our father. She leaned forward, placing her hands flat on the desk. You're thinking too small, Arthur. The original sin wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of the empire. He stared at the ledger, then back at her, a flicker of something not warmth, but sharp, predatory curiosity in his eyes. What is this? This is my husband's life's work, Olivia said, her voice dripping with an irony as bitter as poison. Open it. He hesitated for a moment, then pulled the ledger towards him and opened it to a page she had bookmarked. His eyes, trained to scan complex financial documents in seconds, moved over Richard's coded script and her neat translations beside it. He was silent for a full minute. His face, an unreadable mask. He flipped a page, then another. She pointed to a specific entry from 1988. William Fairfax, president of the bank. You remember when his biggest competitor, Sterling Trust, went under? Everyone thought it was a bad investment in commercial real estate. She tapped the entry. It wasn't. Richard discovered Fairfax was skimming from unclaimed accounts. He didn't expose him. He used that knowledge to force Fairfax to deny Sterling Trust a crucial bridge loan. Richard owned the bank president, Arthur, and he used that power to shape this valley for 3 decades. She watched his face. The coldness was still there, but something else was dawning behind it. A terrible, complex understanding. He looked up from the book, and for the first time, he wasn't looking at her as the sister who stayed behind, the woman complicit in the lie. He was looking at her as something else. He blackmailed them all, Arthur said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact from one predator recognizing the work of another. Everyone, Olivia confirmed. The secrets in these books are the foundation of this town's leadership. And my husband Richard held the mortgage on all their souls. He didn't just inherit a tainted piece of land. He built a fortress on it. You were the exile, driven away by the lie. I was the prisoner living inside it, serving its king without ever knowing it. A long, heavy silence filled the room. The only sound was the faint hum of his laptop. Arthur closed the ledger slowly, his manicured fingers resting on the worn leather cover. The mask of cold indifference finally cracked, not with emotion, but with the chilling focus of a general who has just been handed the enemy's entire battle plan. My God, he breathed, a strange, almost admiring horror in his tone. He was meticulous. He was a monster, Olivia corrected. Arthur looked at her. Truly looked at her. He saw the iron in her spine, the fire in her eyes. He saw another victim, yes, but a victim who had clawed her way out of the grave and had come back with the enemy's weapons. They call me a corporate raider in the papers, Olivia, he said, his voice a low growl. A shark. I don't build things. I find companies rotting from the inside. I find their secrets, their bad investments, their hidden debt. I buy that debt, I gain control of their assets, and I squeeze until the whole rotten structure collapses in on itself, and I can pick the bones clean. He gestured to the ledger. Richard was an amateur. He played for small stakes, a few thousand here, a favour there. He maintained the rot. He didn't understand that the only way to deal with a thing this corrupt is to burn it to the ground. An unspoken understanding passed between them. It was not an alliance born of love, or forgiveness, or rediscovered family bonds. It was something far darker and far more powerful. It was an alliance forged in betrayal, fueled by a shared, bottomless desire for retribution. He saw in her the perfect instrument of his lifelong vengeance, and she saw in him the unstoppable force she needed to deliver her own. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the fields. The rotten land. Ethan, Chloe, William Fairfax at the bank. He listed them off, his voice like chipping ice. Everyone in these books who benefited. Everyone who knew and stayed silent. Everyone who hurt you. He turned back to face her, his eyes blazing with a cold, terrifying light. I will give you my lawyers, my investigators, my money. I will give you everything you need. He paused, letting the weight of his offer settle in the room. We will not just take the farm back, Olivia. We will take everything from them. Their businesses, their reputations, their futures. We will expose every single secret in these books and bring the whole temple down on their heads. This isn't about justice. It's about annihilation. Olivia didn't smile. The time for soft emotions was long past. She simply nodded, her gaze as hard and unyielding as his. The unholy alliance was formed. The ghost in the house and the vengeful king had declared war. The air in the farmhouse crackled with a strange electric anticipation, a stillness that felt heavier than silence. For 2 days, the old house had been a command center, a war room disguised with floral wallpaper and the faint scent of lemon polish. Arthur's legal team, a trio of sharp-suited sharks from the city, had appeared on the large television screen in the living room, their faces a mosaic of confident professionalism. Mia sat beside Olivia on the sofa, her laptop open, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she cross-referenced data streams and highlighted lines of code. "We have it," the lead lawyer, a man named Sterling, said, his voice crisp and devoid of emotion. "The digital signature packet for the power of attorney and the sales contract. Miss Vance, your granddaughter is a prodigy. The metadata is undeniable." On the screen, he shared a document. It was a string of numbers and letters, incomprehensible to Olivia. But Mia leaned in, her eyes alight. "The IP address," Mia explained, her voice a low, excited hum. The signature was executed from an IP address, registered to the Willow Creek Public Library's guest Wi-Fi network, not from the farmhouse's dedicated satellite internet. Sterling nodded. Furthermore, the device signature corresponds to an unregistered burner tablet, not your grandmother's known devices. But here's the clincher. He highlighted another line. The timestamp of the final execution was 2:47 p.m. on the Tuesday following the funeral. "Mrs. Miller," he said, addressing Olivia directly, "can you account for your whereabouts at that exact time?" Olivia's hand, resting on the worn armrest of the sofa, tightened. The memory was sharp, painful. A moment of desperate normalcy she had tried to cling to. "Yes," she said, her voice clear. "I was at the pharmacy. In town. Picking up my blood pressure medication. I felt unwell. I remember speaking to Mrs. Gable, the pharmacist. I was there for at least 20 minutes. We've already spoken to her," Sterling said. "She corroborates your story completely. We also have the pharmacy's security camera footage, time-stamped at 2:51 p.m. It shows you at the counter. The sale was finalized while you were 3 miles away. It's open and shut wire fraud, not to mention forgery and elder abuse." Ethan didn't even bother to be clever about it. He was arrogant. A cold satisfaction settled in Olivia's chest. But it wasn't triumph. It was just the grim confirmation of a betrayal so complete it had become mundane. While she was picking up pills to keep her heart from giving out, her son was electronically erasing her life. Mia closed her laptop. "That's the legal key. That invalidates the sale. The farm is yours again, Grandma." Olivia looked not at Mia, but at Arthur, who stood by the window, staring out at the land. "It's not enough," she said softly. "Getting the farm back isn't the point anymore. It's just a piece of dirt. Stolen dirt. This is about the rot underneath. The rot he was willing to use." Later that evening, after the lawyers had signed off and Mia had gone to her room to prepare her forensic presentation, Olivia sat alone in the study. Richard's study, the place she had once feared, now felt like her own. The coded ledgers were spread across the heavy oak desk, pages filled with her late husband's spidery, meticulous script. For days she had been wrestling with the final section, a series of entries that used a different cipher, a more personal one based on dates and numbers from their early life together. Anniversaries, birthdays, the closing date on their first real mortgage. Her fingers traced a line of code. 10 to 17 negative 78. The day Chloe was born. Underneath it, a series of numbers. She cross-referenced them with an old calendar, then with a list of local business incorporations from that year. It didn't make sense. And then it clicked. It wasn't a date. It was a sequence. The 10th letter of the alphabet. The 17th, the 78th word. On a specific page of a book she knew Richard read. Every year a dusty copy of The Wealth of Nations. Her breath hitched. She worked faster, her heart pounding a heavy rhythm against her ribs. The words began to form, sentences materializing from the cryptic numbers. It was a summary, a final, damning confession. It detailed not just the blackmail, but the origin of the scheme itself. It spoke of a desperate gamble Richard had made early in their marriage to cover a series of catastrophic investment losses, a secret he had hidden from her for over 50 years. The blackmail wasn't just about greed, it was about survival. It was the bedrock upon which their entire comfortable life had been built. But there was one last entry. A short addendum, dated 10 years ago. The cipher was simpler, almost lazy. The message was brutal. E knows. Found ledgers. The loan is not a loan. It is the first payment. My own son, asterisk. Olivia slumped back in the chair, the air leaving her lungs in a ragged gasp. It was worse. So much worse. Ethan hadn't just stumbled into wickedness. He had inherited it. He had studied his father's sins and then perfected them, turning the weapon back on its creator. She pushed the chair back and walked into the living room, where Arthur was on the phone, his back to her. His voice was smooth as silk, a purr of expensive reason. "Ethan, my boy, listen," Arthur was saying. "This has all gotten rather messy, unpleasant for everyone, especially for your mother." A pause. "No, that's precisely why I'm calling. I've had my people look at the situation. A protracted legal battle. It helps no one. The lawyers get rich, and the family is dragged through the mud. I find I have no appetite for it." He listened again, a small, predatory smile touching his lips. "Exactly. So here is my proposal, a final settlement. We meet at the farmhouse. You, Chloe, your wife, and your banker. Mr. Davies, I believe? The man who was so efficient in approving the transfer. We sign a few papers. I will offer you a buyout. A generous one. More than the farm is worth. Enough to make this whole unfortunate business disappear for good. You walk away with a significant profit, and I get the land without any further complications. Olivia will be well cared for. Everyone wins." He was baiting the trap with their own greed, promising them the one thing they couldn't resist. More. Friday. 3:00. Arthur concluded. "Yes, at the house. A final goodbye to the old place, you might say." "Excellent. I'll see you then." He hung up and turned, his eyes meeting Olivia's across the room. He saw the ledger in her hand, saw the look on her face. He didn't need to ask. "So," he said, his voice losing its silken charm and returning to the familiar gravelly tone, "you found the heart of the rot. He blackmailed his own father," Olivia whispered, the words feeling like poison on her tongue. "He built his life on it." Arthur's expression didn't change, but a new, dangerous light flickered in his eyes. "Good," he said, his voice a low growl. "That makes it simpler. There is no line they haven't crossed. There is no mercy to consider." He walked over to a small panel by the fireplace, tapping it lightly. A tiny, almost invisible lens was revealed. "The cameras are ready. The stage is set." Olivia looked around the living room, her home, the place where she'd raised her children, mourned her husband, and lived out her life. It had been a prison of quiet lies. Now, it would be a courtroom, and she would be the judge. The gravel crunched outside precisely at 3:00 on Friday. Ethan's silver sedan pulled up first, gleaming with an obnoxious new car shine. He got out, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive suit, a portrait of smug success. Chloe emerged from the passenger side, dressed in a designer outfit that was completely inappropriate for a farm, her face a mask of impatient entitlement. Sarah, Ethan's wife, scurried out after them, her expression a mixture of anxiety and avarice. She clutched a leather portfolio to her chest like a shield. A moment later, a conservative Blacktown car followed, and Mr. Davies, the bank president, stepped out. He was a man in his late 50s, with a carefully maintained tan and the placid, condescending air of someone who has spent a lifetime saying no to people less important than himself. He nodded curtly to Ethan. They walked into the living room as a group, their arrogance filling the space, displacing the quiet, familiar air. The room was arranged not for a friendly meeting, but for an audience. Olivia sat in her usual armchair, the one Richard had always favoured. Mia stood silently by a large television mounted on the wall, her face impassive. Arthur was a pillar of stillness by the fireplace, watching them, saying nothing. "Arthur," Ethan began, clapping his hands together in a show of magnanimous bonhomie. He strode toward the centre of the room, taking command. "Good. Glad we can put this unpleasantness behind us, for Mother's sake, of course." He glanced at Olivia with a look of practiced pity. "She's been through enough." Mr. Davies offered a tight, professional smile. "Indeed, a clean break is always best. We have the final transfer documents ready for your signature, Arthur." A simple process. Ethan looked at Arthur, expecting him to take the lead, to begin the negotiation. But Arthur remained silent. He simply lifted his chin, his gaze shifting to his sister. The gesture was clear, unequivocal. He was ceding the floor. A flicker of confusion crossed Ethan's face. He turned to Olivia, his patronizing smile returning. "Mother, there's no need for you to worry about this. The men will handle the details. You just rest." And then Olivia spoke. Her voice was not the frail, reedy thing they were used to. It was quiet, but it filled the room with an astonishing weight. It was the voice of a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to say. "I will not rest, Ethan," she said. "I will not be handled. You will sit, all of you." The command was so unexpected, so contrary to the woman they thought they knew, that they obeyed instinctively. Ethan, Chloe, and Sarah took the sofa. Mr. Davies, after a moment's hesitation, perched uneasily on a straight-backed chair. Olivia's eyes, clear and unblinking, moved from face to face. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't angry. She was prosecuting. "We're here to discuss the farm," she began, her voice steady as a rock. "So let's start with the truth of it. This land, this house, it was never truly ours. It was founded on a theft, a lie told by my father, your grandfather, to cheat his own brother out of his inheritance 60 years ago. Arthur's inheritance." A stunned silence fell. Chloe scoffed. "What are you talking about? Grandpa was a saint. Your grandfather was a desperate man." Arthur's voice cut in, cold and sharp from the fireplace, and he passed that desperation down. Olivia held up a hand, silencing him. This was her stage. "The sin didn't end there," she continued, her gaze landing squarely on the bank president. "It just went dormant. Until my husband, Richard, found a new way to profit from secrets." She leaned forward slightly, picking up a sheaf of papers from the small table beside her. They were photocopies from the ledgers. "Mr. Davies, you've been the president of Willow Creek Savings and Loan for 20 years. You've built a reputation as a pillar of the community, a prudent, conservative banker." Davies shifted in his chair, his professional mask tightening. "I'm not sure what this has to do with anything, Olivia." "Oh, I think you do," she said, her voice dropping. "Let's talk about the summer of 2008. The development loan for the Willow Creek Strip Mall, a $50 million project. Your board was hesitant. The developer had a shaky financial history. The projections were optimistic. The loan should have been denied." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "But it was approved, unanimously. Do you remember why, Mr. Davies?" The man's face was beginning to lose its tan. A sheen of sweat appeared on his upper lip. "It was a sound business decision. Was it? Olivia said, her eyes boring into him. Or was it because Richard knew about your other sound business decision? The one from 1,999, the undocumented personal loan you gave to your brother-in-law using the bank's money, after he'd been convicted of fraud in another state. A loan that was never repaid, just quietly written off as a clerical error. Richard had the paperwork. He showed it to you, didn't he? One meeting, in your office, and suddenly, the strip mall seemed like a very sound investment indeed. Davis's face was now a pasty, sickly white. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Chloe stared at him, then at Olivia. Blackmail? Dad was blackmailing Mr. Davies? He was blackmailing half the town. Olivia said flatly. For 40 years, and I lived on top of it, sleeping next to it, without ever knowing. But some people, her eyes moved to her son, some people knew, some people learned from it. She looked at Ethan, whose face was a thunderous mask of outrage and disbelief. This is insane! You're delirious! What is this? Some kind of pathetic fantasy. I'm not the one living in a fantasy, Ethan, Olivia said calmly. She nodded to her granddaughter. Mia? Mia picked up a remote. The large television flickered to life. A complex diagram of file folders and code filled the screen. This is the forensic analysis of the sales contract you had my grandmother sign, Mia said, her voice as clear and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. She clicked the remote. This is the document's metadata. As you can see, it was created on a Tuesday morning. It was then emailed to a temporary anonymous account. Another click. And here, this is the record of the digital signature. It was finalized at 2:47 in the afternoon. Mia's gaze lifted from the screen and locked onto her father's. The signature was executed using a device connected to the public Wi-Fi at the Willow Creek Library. We have the logs. Now, for the interesting part. A new window popped up on the screen. It was grainy security footage. A familiar figure stood at a pharmacy counter, her back to the camera. The timestamp in the corner read 2:51 p.m. This, Mia said, her voice ringing with cold fury, is Grandma. At the pharmacy. At the exact time you were supposedly finalizing the deal with her here at the farm. You didn't just trick her, Dad. You committed wire fraud. You forged a digital signature. It's a federal crime. And we have incontrovertible proof. The room erupted. This is a setup. Chloe shrieked, jumping to her feet. You're lying. Ethan, tell them. They're lying. Mr. Davis was half out of his chair, his face a mess of panic. This is slander. I will not be a party to this family squabble. Ethan was on his feet, his face purple with rage, his finger jabbing at the screen. That's fabricated. You hacked that. You're trying to frame me. My own daughter. Sarah, his wife, was a statue of horror on the sofa, her portfolio clutched to her chest, her eyes wide with the dawning catastrophic realization of their reality. Through the cacophony of denials and accusations, Olivia remained perfectly still in her chair. She waited, letting the storm of their panic break over her. She watched her son, the man she had raised, the boy whose scraped knees she had bandaged, reduced to a sputtering, cornered animal. She waited for the noise to subside into ragged breaths and panicked glances. When a fragile silence fell, she spoke again, her voice cutting through the thick, poisoned air. She didn't raise it. She didn't have to. The quiet authority in it was more powerful than any shout. She looked directly at Ethan, her gaze so intense it seemed to pin him to the spot. The ledgers, she said. The words simple, devastating. Richard's ledgers. You think your father was a careless man? You think he would have left them somewhere I, or anyone else, could just stumble upon them? Ethan stared at her, his mind racing, trying to find a new lie, a new escape route. He was trapped. He didn't hide them from you, did he, Ethan? Olivia's voice was soft, a silken cord, tightening around his neck, because he didn't have to. You already knew where they were. You found them 10 years ago. The air in the room seemed to crystallize. Chloe froze, her head snapping around to stare at her brother. Don't you remember? Olivia pressed on, her memory now a weapon she wielded with surgical precision. It was after your father's first heart scare. He was in the hospital for a week. You were so concerned. You spent so much time here at the farm organizing his office. That's what you told me. She held his gaze, refusing to let him look away. But you weren't organizing. You were searching. You always suspected he was more than just a clever farmer. You always felt that his power, his influence, came from somewhere dark. And you found it. In a locked box at the back of his closet. You found his life's work. You found the ledgers. Ethan's face had gone from purple rage to a bloodless, waxy pale. He was shaking his head, a pathetic, silent denial. A good son would have been horrified, Olivia continued, her voice devoid of all emotion except a vast, cold clarity. A decent man would have exposed him, or at least confronted him. But you saw an opportunity. You saw leverage. She let the last word hang in the air, ugly and obscene. Your tech business, she said. Your brilliant startup. You needed capital. A lot of it. The banks all turned you down. Your business plan was too risky, they said. But then suddenly, you got it. A massive loan. From your father. You told everyone he finally saw your potential. That he finally believed in you. She looked over at Chloe, whose face was a mask of dawning, gut-wrenching horror. But it wasn't a loan, was it, Ethan? It wasn't a father's gift. It was the first payment. The price of your silence. You didn't just build your business on a lie. You built it by blackmailing your own father. You used his life of sin to finance your own. Chloe let out a small, strangled sound. She stared at her brother, as if seeing him for the first time. The man she had admired, envied, and followed. The successful older brother, who had always seemed so far ahead. Ethan? She whispered, her voice trembling. The money? For your company? You told me, Dad, just... He was proud of you. The realization hit her like a physical blow. It wasn't just about the farm. It wasn't just about greed. It was about a betrayal so profound, so rotten to its core, that it rewrote their entire family history. Her brother's success, his beautiful home, his perfect life was all funded by the ugliest secret their family held. He hadn't just sold their mother's home. He had sold their father's soul, and his own along with it. You're lying, Ethan finally roared, finding his voice. It was raw, shredded with desperation. She's a senile old woman. She's lost her mind. She's making it all up to hurt me. It's all lies. He spun around, his wild eyes pleading with the others. You can't believe this. It's a performance. As his denials grew more frantic, more unhinged, Arthur finally moved. He pushed himself away from the fireplace, taking a single, deliberate step forward. He had been a statue of coiled power, an observer at his own play. Now the actor was taking the stage for the final act. It's all true, Arthur said. His voice was calm, almost conversational, but it sliced through Ethan's hysteria like a razor. Every last sordid word of it, Ethan sputtered, pointing a shaking finger at him. And you're behind this. You put her up to it. I did. Arthur agreed without hesitation. He then smiled, a thin, cruel slash of a smile that held no warmth. And I have it all on tape. He made a subtle gesture towards the small, almost invisible lens near the mantelpiece. Then another, towards a bookshelf. In fact, I have it on 3 different cameras, from 3 different angles. Every word, every lie, every panic denial, every confession you made with your terrified eyes. It's been recorded in high definition. A new kind of silence fell over the room. Not of shock, but of pure, cold dread. The air became thick, hard to breathe. Arthur took another step into the center of the room, his presence utterly dominant. He looked at the ruined faces before him, Ethan, Chloe, Sarah, Mr. Davies. They were rats in a trap, and they were only just now realizing the walls were made of steel. "You know," he said, his tone one of mock contemplation, "there's a fatal lack of imagination in common criminals. You are all so focused on stealing one little farm, a few hundred acres of dirt. It's quaint." He let out a short, sharp laugh that was more of a bark. "While you were busy stealing a farm, I was busy buying your lives." He locked his eyes on Ethan. "Your company, Innovate Dynamics. A house of cards built on my father's shame. It's leveraged to the hilt. That second round of venture capital funding you were so proud of. I bought the firm that holds the debt, the lines of credit you use to make payroll. I own them. As of 9 o'clock this morning, your largest and most aggressive creditor is me. I will be calling in those debts on Monday. All of them." Ethan's legs gave out. He stumbled backwards, collapsing onto the sofa, his face utterly vacant with shock. Arthur's gaze shifted to Chloe. "Your beautiful home in the city, the one with the view. Your mortgage was with Willow Creek Savings and Loan. Was. I acquired their high-risk mortgage portfolio last week for pennies on the dollar. You have 30 days. You'll be receiving the foreclosure notice. It will have my name on it." Chloe made a choking sound, her hand flying to her mouth. Sarah began to weep openly beside her, her sobs thin and pathetic in the cavernous silence. Finally, Arthur turned to the Ghost White Bank president. "And you, Mr. Davis, your position at the bank, your very career, is propped up by a handful of very powerful, very private investors. Investors who value discretion above all else. I happen to know them all personally. And this morning, on my advice, they have initiated proceedings to pull every last dollar of their capital from your institution. The evidence of your long-standing arrangement with Richard Miller, along with your complicity in this fraud, has been delivered to the State Banking Commission. You will be lucky if all you lose is your job." He stood over them, a dark angel of their own making. He let his words sink in, let them feel the full, crushing weight of their absolute destruction. At that moment, a new sound began to filter in from the outside. Faint at first, a distant, mournful cry. Then, growing steadily, undeniably louder, the sound of sirens. "You are all ruined," Arthur stated, his voice flat, a simple statement of fact. He looked toward the long driveway, where the flashing red and blue lights were now visible, painting the trees in frantic, alternating colors. "My lawyers delivered a copy of all the evidence, the ledgers, Mia's forensic report, Richard's confession to the district attorney an hour ago. The live recording of this entire meeting was just streamed directly to their office as corroboration." He looked back at their horrified faces one last time. "Justice," he said as the first police car pulled to a stop in the yard, "is at the door." The wail of the sirens grew from a distant cry to an all-consuming scream, bleeding through the thick farmhouse walls. For a moment, no one moved. The air, already thick with accusation and ruin, became a solid, vibrating thing. Ethan's face was a mask of chalky disbelief, his eyes darting from Olivia to Arthur, then to the flashing red and blue lights that began to strobe across the living room, painting the family portraits in demonic hues of panic. He opened his mouth, but only a dry, clicking sound came out. Chloe was the first to break. A low, guttural sound escaped her throat, a wounded animal's cry. "No," she whispered, her perfectly manicured hands flying to her mouth. "No, no, no." The heavy knock on the door was a formality. Before Arthur could even nod to his lawyer, 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, their presence sucking all the remaining air out of the room. They were calm, professional, their faces impassive. They weren't here for a family drama. They were here to execute a warrant. One of them held a document, his eyes scanning the room and landing on Ethan. "Ethan Miller?" the officer asked, his voice a flat procedural tone that cut through the hysteria. Ethan flinched as if struck. He looked at Olivia, his eyes pleading, the arrogance he'd worn like a second skin stripped away to reveal the terrified boy beneath. "Mum, what is this?" "Tell them. Tell them it's a mistake, a misunderstanding. Olivia did not look at him. She couldn't. To look at him now would be to acknowledge the son she had loved, the ghost of a memory. Instead, she turned her gaze to the window, to the old oak tree she and Richard had planted when they were young. Its branches were bare, stark against the pulsing lights. It looked like a skeleton. Arthur stood beside her, a pillar of granite. He didn't speak, didn't offer a comforting hand. His presence was enough. It was an anchor in the storm he had unleashed. Ethan Miller, the officer repeated, taking a step forward. You are under arrest for multiple counts of felony fraud, forgery, and extortion. The words hung in the air, each one a hammer blow. Ethan stumbled back, bumping into the coffee table where, just an hour ago, he had sat with the smug confidence of a king. No, you can't! This is my house! The officer's partner moved with practiced efficiency, taking Ethan's arm. There was no violent struggle, just a pathetic, weak resistance. You have the right to remain silent, the cop recited, his voice a monotone drone as he cuffed Ethan's hands behind his back. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As the familiar words of the Miranda warning filled the room, Ethan's composure finally shattered. His gaze locked on Arthur. You, he spat, his voice cracking with venom and fear. You did this. You snake, coming back from the dead to ruin us. Arthur's expression didn't flicker. He simply met his nephew's gaze with eyes that held the cold, remote emptiness of a winter sky. The bank president, Mr. Henderson, who had been frozen in his armchair, finally found his voice. He shot to his feet, his face florid. This is an outrage. I am a respected member of this community. You have no right. He was cut off not by a police officer, but by Arthur's lawyer. A sharp woman, in a tailored suit named Miss Davies. She stepped forward, holding out a thick envelope. Mr. Henderson, she said, her voice crisp and devoid of emotion. This is a subpoena from the U.S. Attorney's Office. It details the federal investigation into your lending practices, your collusion with Mr. Miller, and the material evidence of racketeering we have provided. You are also named in a civil suit for your role in the conspiracy to defraud Mrs. Olivia Miller. I'd advise you to stop talking and call your attorney. Your career is over. Your freedom is the only thing left to negotiate. Henderson stared at the envelope as if it were a viper. He took it with a trembling hand, his face draining of all colour, until it was a pasty, sickly grey. He looked around the room, at the flashing lights, at the disgraced son, at the silent matriarch, and he understood. He was just another piece of collateral damage in a war he hadn't even known he was fighting. He sank back into his chair, a deflated man. Chloe was a wreck. She wasn't being arrested, but she was trapped in the wreckage all the same. She watched her brother, her partner in crime, being led out of the home they had tried to steal. The front door opened, and the cold Montana night swept in, along with the cacophony of more sirens, of shouted questions from reporters who had already gathered at the end of the long driveway like vultures. The flash of cameras began, a relentless, blinding assault. Sarah, Ethan's wife, had been silent through the entire confrontation, a statue of pale shock. But now, as she watched her husband being guided into the back of a police car, something within her shifted. The shock hardened into a cold, clear resolution. She walked not to Chloe, not to her father-in-law's ghost, but to Olivia. Her steps were hesitant. Olivia, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I am so sorry. For all of it. I lived in his world. I believed his excuses. I never should have. I'm sorry. It wasn't an apology for him. It was an apology for herself, for her own blindness. Olivia finally turned from the window. She looked at her daughter-in-law, a woman she had known for 30 years, and saw not an accomplice, but another victim of the Millermen's lies. Olivia gave a slow, tired nod. It was all she could offer. Sarah nodded back, a silent understanding passing between them. She pulled out her phone, her fingers moving with a new, sharp purpose. She didn't have to say who she was calling. Her expression said it all. She was calling a divorce lawyer. She was severing the final tie. She was saving herself. The farm became a crime scene. Yellow tape was stretched across the familiar porch railings. The home that had held 55 years of Olivia's life was now a piece of evidence, its contents to be catalogued, its secrets laid bare for strangers to see. Arthur's people moved Olivia out that night, quietly, efficiently, spiriting her away to a sterile but luxurious suite in a Bozeman hotel. From her window, she could see the city lights, a world away from the suffocating darkness of Willow Creek. The news broke like a dam. It wasn't just a local story anymore. The scale of the corruption, implicating the town's main bank, tied to a web of blackmail stretching back decades, made it a statewide scandal. News vans became a permanent fixture at the end of the farm's driveway. The Willow Creek conspiracy was the headline on every news site. Digital wildfire consumed them. On the website for the Bozeman Daily Chronicle, the top story read, "Banking Scion Arrested. Local financial institution implicated in decades. Long extortion ring." Below it, a picture of Ethan, haggard and defeated, being led into the county courthouse. The comment section was a torrent of outrage and speculation. User Big Sky Guy 72 wrote, "Always knew something was rotten at that bank. Henderson was always too slick." Asterisk. User MT Mama Bear replied, "It's the son I feel for." Oh wait, no I don't. Rot in jail. What kind of person does that to their own 80-year-old mother? Asterisk. A TikToker who specialized in true crime went viral with a video shot in front of the farm's gate. "What's up, crime crew?" she'd say, pointing her phone at the distant farmhouse. "We are live at the center of the Miller family implosion. A story of greed, betrayal, and a badass grandma who brought the whole corrupt house of cards down. Smash that like button if you think Olivia Miller is an icon." Chloe wasn't arrested, but in the court of public opinion she was convicted. Her name was inextricably linked to the scandal. The financing for her boutique development in Big Sky was pulled. Her business partners ghosted her calls. Her friends from the country club suddenly stopped inviting her to brunch. She was financially ruined and socially radioactive. In a single evening, she had lost everything. Her brother, her wealth, her reputation. She was left alone in her oversized house, a prisoner of her own ambition, the silence screaming louder than any siren. The first snows of winter had begun to dust the sharp peaks of the Bridger Mountains, a fine white powder on the dark rock, when Arthur came to see her. The storm of the media had calmed to a steady, simmering buzz. The legal proceedings were grinding forward, a slow, merciless machine. Olivia had spent the intervening time in the quiet solitude of the hotel suite, a kind of peaceful purgatory. She read books, she watched the snow fall, she slept through the night without the weight of the farmhouse pressing down on her. Arthur didn't knock. He used his own key card, letting himself into the suite. He found her by the large plate glass window, looking out at the snow-covered city. The air between them was no longer charged with hostility or suspicion. It was filled with a different kind of energy, the heavy, dense silence of a shared and brutal history, finally confronted. He didn't speak at first, just stood near the door, taking off his expensive wool coat. He looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper than she remembered. This war had taken a toll on him too. "It's almost done," he said finally, his voice a low rumble. He gestured to the polished mahogany table in the center of the room. "The legal team has been busy." Olivia turned from the window. She felt a strange calm, a sense of detachment she hadn't known was possible. "Ethan?" she asked, her voice even. "He took a plea deal," Arthur said, walking over to the table. "Fraud, extortion. The federal charges were too much. They had him cold with Richard's ledgers. He'll serve a minimum of 10 years in a federal facility. Sarah's divorce was finalized last week. She got everything. Chloe declared bankruptcy. Henderson is facing a federal trial. He cannot win. The machine is efficient. He laid two thick, leather-bound folders on the table. They landed with a soft, final thud. "What are those?" Olivia asked, though she felt she already knew. "Your future," Arthur said simply. He tapped the folder on the left. "This is the farm. The title has been cleared. Every fraudulent document, every lien, every claim has been legally expunged. It took a team of 10 lawyers and a small fortune, but it is pristine. It's yours, Olivia, free and clear, the prize you fought for, the home you defended." He let that sink in before sliding the second folder forward. It was slimmer. He opened it. Inside was a single professionally printed document, a real estate prospectus, or, he continued, his voice softer now. "There is this, a valuation and sale proposal from the top commercial real estate firm in the state. They have a buyer lined up, a development consortium from California. They want the land for a luxury eco-resort. They don't care about the history. They only care about the view and the acreage." He pointed to a number at the bottom of the page. It was staggering. A figure with 7 zeros. Enough money to disappear, to start over, to live out the rest of her days in any corner of the world she chose. "You can have the home," he said, looking her directly in the eye. "Or you can have the freedom from it. The choice is entirely yours. There are no strings." Olivia walked slowly to the table. She looked down at the two folders. Victory and freedom. The past and the future. She ran her hand over the smooth leather of the first folder, the one containing the deed to the farm. For 55 years, that land, that house, had been her entire world. It was where she had fallen in love, raised her children, grieved her husband. It was the place she had just fought a war to keep. She thought of the smell of the hayfields in summer, the warmth of the stone fireplace in winter, the weight of the old quilt on her bed. But then other memories bled through. Richard, locking the door to the cellar, his face a cold, closed mask. The discovery of the ledgers, the sickening realization that her entire marriage, her entire life, had been built on a foundation of secrets and rot. She saw Ethan's face, not as a baby, but as the predator who had tricked her, his eyes cold and greedy. She saw Chloe, measuring the rooms for new furniture before Richard was even cold in the ground. The house wasn't a home anymore, it was a museum of pain. It was a monument to the lies of men, her father, her husband, her son. She had fought to save it, but now she realized she hadn't been fighting for the house at all. "What was it all for, Arthur?" she asked, her voice a near whisper, looking not at him but at the documents. "For our father, stealing it from his own brother. For Richard, using its secrets to blackmail and control an entire town. For Ethan, willing to destroy his own mother for it. All this generational sickness, for a patch of dirt. For them, it was about power," Arthur said, his voice laced with a weary understanding. "It was their inheritance, a legacy of theft. The question is, what is it to you?" Olivia looked up from the folders and met her brother's gaze. For the first time, she saw him not as a spectre from the past or a vengeful billionaire, but as another survivor of their family's poisoned legacy. He had escaped it by disappearing. Now, he was offering her the same chance. She thought about the fight, the terror, the desperation, the moment she found the ledgers, the alliance with Arthur, the confrontation. She had stood up. She had spoken the truth. She had taken back her own power. The fight was the victory, not the prize. She looked at the first folder, the deed to the farm. It represented the cage she had lived in for 55 years. A beautiful, familiar cage, but a cage nonetheless. Then she looked at the second folder, at the impossible number on the page. It wasn't about the money. It was about what the money represented. An open door, an empty horizon, a life that hadn't been chosen for her by a father, or a husband, or a son, a life of her own. She slid the first folder, the one with the deed, across the polished table toward Arthur. Her hand then came to rest on the second folder. A slow, deliberate breath escaped her lips. a breath that felt like it was releasing 55 years of dust and shadows. "Sell it," she said. The two words were quiet, but they resonated in the silent room with the force of a tectonic shift. Arthur's eyebrows raised, just slightly. "Are you sure, Olivia? After everything?" "I'm sure," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I didn't fight for the land, Arthur. I fought for me, for my right to exist, to not be erased. And the person I am now, she doesn't live there anymore. She can't. That house is full of ghosts. I'm done with ghosts." A rare, small smile touched Arthur's lips. It was a smile of respect. He nodded slowly. "All right, Olivia. I'll have Miss Davies draw up the papers." He picked up the first folder. "This," he said, holding the deed, "was their story. It ends now." The Pacific salt on the air tasted of a freedom she had only ever read about in novels. Months had passed. The snow in Montana had melted, giving way to the green shoots of another spring, but Olivia wasn't there to see it. Her new home was not a house, but an apartment, a sleek, modern space high up in a glass tower in Santa Monica. The walls weren't filled with portraits of the past, but with light and air. One entire wall was a window, looking out over the endless, churning blue of the ocean. She was on a video call, the screen of her tablet propped up on the kitchen island. Mia's face smiled back at her, bright and energetic, the city skyline of Chicago visible behind her. "The firm officially gave me the lead on the Henderson case files, Grandma," Mia was saying, her eyes shining with passion. "The pro bono division. We're building a class action suit on behalf of a dozen other families he swindled with predatory loans. You started something, you know that?" Olivia smiled, a real, easy smile. "You're the one doing the work, my love. I'm just enjoying the view." "How is the view?" Mia asked, her tone softening. "Are you okay, really?" Olivia turned her tablet so Mia could see the ocean. The sun was beginning to set, casting a brilliant orange and pink glow across the water. "I'm better than okay, Mia. I'm new." They talked for a while longer, about Mia's work, about a book Olivia was reading, about the simple, everyday things that now made up her life. There was no talk of Ethan or Chloe or the farm. They were chapters in a book she had finished reading. "I have to run," Mia said finally. "Deposition in the morning. I love you, Grandma." "I love you too, sweetheart. Go change the world." Olivia ended the call, and the apartment was filled with a comfortable silence, broken only by the distant, rhythmic crash of the waves. She walked to the giant window, her bare feet cool on the polished concrete floor. She looked out at the vast, limitless horizon, where the water met the sky. For 55 years, her view had been of the same mountains, the same fields, the same fence line that had marked the edges of her world. It was a beautiful prison. This was different. This was boundless. For the first time in her life, a smile spread across her lips that was not for a husband, not for a child, not for a guest. It wasn't a smile of victory or relief, or even happiness. It was a smile of profound quiet and absolute peace. A smile that was entirely, and finally, her own.